She sat on a throne of silk, her skin crawling beneath layers of velvet and lace, and no one dared breathe too close, because the stench was unforgettable. One ambassador reportedly vomited in his mouth and had to swallow it back before finishing his diplomatic greeting. Another fainted in the corridor after merely passing by her chambers. And yet, she ruled. Feasts were held in her honor. Poets praised her radiance, and entire kingdoms bowed to the filth that lived on her body like a second skin. You think royalty meant elegance? Think again. Some queens in history didn't bathe for years, not by accident, not by poverty, but by choice. And the reasons why are more disturbing than you can imagine. Before we begin, answer this in the comments. What's the longest you've gone without a proper shower? Be honest, because what you're about to hear will make even the worst hangover mornings feel like spa days. Let's begin with Queen X. Her name erased in sanitized textbooks, but her legend whispered in court corridors and among terrified maids. She ascended the throne not through battle or bloodline, but through marriage to a powerful but distracted monarch. She was beautiful, they said, at first until something shifted. At court, servants began whispering. Her gown smelled metallic, her sheets had to be burned weekly. Rumors spread. She feared water. She believed it opened the pores to demonic spirits. And so, she stopped washing. Not for a day, not for a week, not for a year. According to one diary entry from a court physician, the skin on her back had begun to harden. A fungal crust had formed beneath her corset, mixing with perfume and pus. But no one said a word. Not even when the queen's fingernails darkened from rot. Because to mention it, treason. She demanded only scented oils, not to cleanse, but to mask. But oils layered on filth become a prison. Her ladies-in-waiting were forced to hold their breath as they dressed her, one vomiting silently behind the curtains. When one new maid dared to light incense during a dress fitting, the queen struck her across the face and screamed, "I smell divine!" One night during a banquet, her arm began to bleed through her gown. Slowly, without injury, the cloth had fused with her skin. A bishop sitting beside her turned pale. She looked at him, smiled, and said, "I am touched by heaven." He retired the next morning, forever. By the end of her life, the queen had not touched water in 28 years. Her chamber had to be stripped and destroyed after her death. The stone walls beneath her bed reeked of ammonia and roses. No autopsy was allowed. Official cause of death: natural complications. Unofficially, infection, skin degradation, internal poisoning. But history wrote none of that, because kingdoms don't record their queens in filth. They bury it, and she wasn't the only one. Still with me? You're not ready for what comes next. The year was 1473. In the stone-cold halls of the Bohemian court, the stench came before the crown. Queen Barbara of Chile, wife of Emperor Sigismund, was once described as a woman of extraordinary cunning and power. But the commoners had a different name for her: the plague in silk. They didn't mean her politics. She despised water, not out of fear, but out of ideology. "Water is for peasants," she once told a chambermaid. "Soap is for sinners." Her body, she believed, was a vessel of divine authority, unworthy of the vulgarity of cleansing. And so, for the final 16 years of her life, Barbara did not bathe. Instead, she powdered daily. Her attendants layered thick, chalky substances onto her skin until her flesh was no longer visible. Her dresses had to be peeled off with knives. Her undergarments burned after a single use. Maids passed out regularly. One even collapsed and cracked her skull on the marble floor during a dressing ceremony. When told of it, Barbara reportedly smiled and said, "Better the weak fall." But there was more. She ate raw meat. Not out of hunger, but to consume life, as she phrased it. Pigeons, rabbit livers, lamb still pink. Devour with bare hands, juices dripping down her wrists, mixing into the chalk crust on her arms. The royal physician documented open lesions beneath her breasts. "Festering," he wrote, "smells like the dead." But when he tried to suggest medical attention, she ordered his exile. The replacement physician? Blind. She allowed no mirrors in her quarters, not because of vanity, but because she believed mirrors were doors for the devil. She never saw herself. Only others did, and they never spoke. Dignitaries visiting from France demanded their audience be moved to the open garden. A diplomatic insult at the time, but they simply couldn't bear the smell. Her guards threatened retaliation. The diplomats relented. They met the queen in her chambers. One later described the experience as walking into a mausoleum that breathed. Still, Barbara was not shunned. She held immense influence. Her letters dictated policy in Hungary, her spies infiltrated Polish courts, and her coins bore not her husband's face, but her own. But behind the power was rot. A diary discovered centuries later in a monastery described a servant's last week in her court. He wrote, "The queen bleeds nightly from her scalp. The maids say her hair is dying. We collect the lice in jars and burn them by the dozen. Her skin peels in the morning like candle wax. The sheets are stiff and we must snap them to fold. No one can speak of it. One legend claims her bed was once so infested it began to move on its own, crawling with life. Servants tried to burn the mattress while she was away. She returned mid-ritual and made them lick the ashes from the stone floor. But perhaps the most horrifying detail of all, she believed she was getting purer as the years went on. The body must decay, she said, so the spirit may reign. Barbara died in silence, not because the court was in mourning, but because her final days were a forbidden topic. A papal envoy arrived for her last rites, took one breath inside her room, and fled without uttering a word. Her body was sealed in 3 coffins, wood, lead, and steel, not out of respect, but to contain what was left. Historians tried to erase it, but the walls remembered. Stone doesn't forget, and she wasn't alone. You think Barbara was bad? You haven't heard of the Eastern Empress whose fear of fresh air was so extreme she sealed her windows with wax and refused to let light touch her skin. She didn't just avoid bathing, she outlawed the scent of water. But that's for next time. For now, I want to hear your thoughts. Who do you think was the dirtiest queen in history? Drop a name in the comments, or make one up if you must. The more bizarre, the better. And keep watching. The worst is still to come. In the winter of 1724, the snow outside the Kremlin walls refused to melt. Not from cold, but from fear. Inside the palace, behind layers of stone and silence, lived the woman they called the White Widow. Officially, she was Empress Yekaterina Alexeyevna, consort to Tsar Peter II. Unofficially, she was the nightmare of every servant who ever crossed her threshold. Unlike other monarchs of her time, Catherine was not raised in courtly grace. She came from hunger, cold, and war, a child of sieges and scarcity. And when she ascended to power, she brought that past with her, refusing to let the world convince her that comfort required softness. She feared nothing except cleanliness. Her private chambers were sealed year-round. No one opened a window without direct orders. Those who disobeyed were punished with silence, dismissed without eye contact, without record, disappeared. The Empress called it the purging of air. To her, fresh oxygen meant exposure. Light meant judgment. Water meant death. She bathed once every decade, not in water, but in goat's milk infused with iron nails and crushed garlic. The smell inside her room was described by one French guest as a butcher's shop locked in a closet. He did not finish his audience. He left Russia the next day. But there's more. So much more. Catherine's fear of cleansing became doctrine. She forbade perfume at court, claiming it masked the sins of the flesh. Maids were required to wear the same dress for 7 days straight, and their sweat was considered a form of loyalty. Guests, before entering her presence, had to walk through a narrow corridor lined with buckets of old straw, supposedly to absorb dishonest scents. When a Polish noblewoman fainted during a spring gala, choked by the odor of mold, wet fur, and something else, the Empress leaned over her collapsed body and whispered, "She wasn't worthy of the old air." The court never saw that noble again. Records from her chambermaids describe infestations, not of rats but of rot. Food trays left uneaten for weeks, dried blood on pillows, mice nests in unused wardrobes. Still, no one cleaned, not because they were lazy, but because they were afraid. Cleaning was sacrilege. One maid wrote in a hidden journal, "Her skin sheds. I've seen it. In the morning, flakes like parchment cover the bed. Her feet bleed through the slippers. She will not change them." Still, Catherine ruled. She signed treaties, dictated military orders, hosted foreign dignitaries, and every single person, no matter how horrified, bowed and kissed her gloved hand. They say the glove was never removed in public. It was not to hide jewelry, but something far worse, infection. The Empress was convinced her filth made her untouchable, both physically and politically. "Clean women die young," she once said, "but dirt belongs to the gods." In her final year, when her health began to fail, her doctors begged her to allow basic sanitation. She dismissed them all and replaced them with a traveling healer from the Urals who practiced ritual decay. His cure? Wrapping her limbs in decomposing moss and chanting psalms through a deer skull. It didn't work. On the morning of her death, her sheets were soaked with pus. The smell was so severe that guards vomited in the hall, but none dared report it. Her coffin was sealed the same day. Her burial service lasted 6 minutes, the shortest in Romanov history. Official cause of death: heart failure. Unofficially, sepsis to necrosis, systemic collapse. And yet, decades later, travelers claim they could still smell her when walking past the palace wing where she once slept. The scent of power, they called it. Still think this is just about hygiene? Next, we'll meet a queen who made dirt a doctrine. She didn't just avoid cleanliness, she punished it. She banned water rituals, dismantled bathhouses, and made soap a tool of heresy. And if you think that's the peak of royal filth, you're still climbing. Before you go, tell me in the comments, would you survive 5 minutes in Catherine's chambers? No faking, just raw honesty. Let's see who's got the guts. She stood beneath stained glass windows, barefoot, unwashed, proclaiming, "Cleanliness is rebellion against God." This was Queen Isabella of Castile. Yes, that Isabella, the one history books praise for uniting Spain, funding Columbus, and ushering in the Spanish Empire. But behind the royal portraits and sanitized timelines lies a truth too rancid for schoolrooms. Isabella prided herself on being filthy, not accidentally, not circumstantially, but religiously. She viewed bathing as vanity, a temptation of the flesh, a slippery slope to sin. Dirt, to Isabella, was discipline, a test of purity, a sign of devotion. The holier you were, the less you washed. The more you stank, the closer to heaven you climbed. By her own account, she bathed twice in her life. Once at birth, once before marriage. That was it. You read that correctly. The Queen of Spain, a woman with access to marble bathhouses, scented oils, silk towels, and any physician in Europe, chose to never bathe again after her wedding night for 40 years. But this wasn't just a personal decision, it became state policy. She issued an edict forbidding communal baths in certain provinces, citing moral contagion. She claimed the water had become a theater for the devil. Her inquisitors enforced it. Public bathhouses were shut down. Soap makers were taxed into extinction. Anyone caught bathing too frequently was subject to religious questioning, and she led by example. Witnesses describe her royal gowns as heavily perfumed to mask decay. Her bed sheets had to be scraped clean, not washed. Servants rotated daily to avoid vomiting. When an Italian ambassador visited her chambers, he left after 9 minutes, complaining of an aroma that wounded the eyes. Her confessor, Hernando de Talavera, tried to intervene once, subtly suggesting that hygiene might help her serve God longer. She reportedly replied, "If he wants me fragrant, he'll perfume my soul." He never brought it up again, and still she ruled with an iron will. She expelled the Jews, launched the Inquisition, armed the voyage that discovered the Americas, all while her body slowly fermented inside layers of wool and brocade. Letters from her dressers mention abscesses, sores along the spine, open wounds under the breasts, but she refused treatment. "Pain is a blessing," she was quoted saying. "Clean pain is sinless." Toward the end of her life, doctors begged her to at least allow the use of herbs. She agreed, under one condition: the herbs must never touch water. Instead, they were stuffed into her clothing like potpourri, layered until her garments bulged at the seams. The result? A human compost heap, a monarch who rustled when she walked. When her daughter Joanna, later known as Joanna the Mad, began exhibiting obsessive behaviors and resistance to washing, no one dared ask why. But the lineage was clear, and so was the smell. Isabella died in 1504. According to an account by her court scribe, her body blackened within hours. The undertakers refused to embalm it. They buried her quickly, without public viewing. Her tomb was sealed with resin and crushed myrrh. But even that didn't stop the rumors that the rot leaked into the stone. And yet to this day, she's remembered as Isabella the Catholic, clean in title, putrid in truth. You want more? There's a queen coming who didn't just smell like death. She wore it, bones in her braids, mummified pets in her bed, and under her fingernails, the scabs of servants too slow to scrub the floors. But that's next. In the meantime, tell me in the comments, would you rather live one day in Isabella's court or a week in modern prison? Pick one. No cop-outs, and don't forget to explain why. She entered the great hall draped in black velvet, her face veiled, her hands gloved, her scent arriving minutes before she did. The musicians stopped mid-note. Even the guards shifted their weight, trying not to breathe. This was Queen Hedwig of Lorraine, a name lost to most history books, and maybe for good reason. She didn't just avoid water, she desecrated it. To Hedwig, cleanliness was rebellion, not against God like Isabella of Castile, not against poverty like Catherine of Russia. No, Hedwig's war was against the flesh itself. She believed the body was a prison of sin, and that filth was its chains. The more one suffered, the closer one came to divine understanding. She punished anyone in her court caught bathing. The first offense meant public shaming. The second, whipping. The third, you disappeared. She banned fountains, smashed basins, ordered wells bricked up. Villagers who fetched water in open daylight were accused of heresy. Some were burned, others simply vanished. There were rumors that her private dungeon smelled of mold, vinegar, and something far worse. But Hedwig didn't just forbid water. She declared war on anything that suggested it. Greenery, flowers, even rain. When spring arrived, she ordered her gardeners to salt the palace lawns. Her guards fired arrows at birds that sang too brightly. Windows were covered in soot to darken the light. Joy is a deception, she wrote in one decree, and beauty its accomplice. But what about herself? She wore the same undergarments for months. Her skin cracked from dryness, then wept pus. She smeared her sores with ash and goat blood, believing it to be the seal of saints. Her hair, unwashed for years, was braided with bones. Not ornaments, but the vertebrae of her stillborn children, preserved and woven into her scalp. And yet she slept with mummified pets. Yes, dozens of cats, dogs, even a parrot. Their dried corpses placed in a semicircle around her bed, heads turned toward her. "They are my choir in death," she told a monk once. He never returned to court. One court document, buried deep in a monastery archive, describes an annual ritual called the drying. On the first day of summer, Hedwig would gather her attendants in the courtyard and force them to stand under the sun for hours, no water, no food. Anyone who fainted was deemed unworthy. Those who lasted were cleansed by fire. But nothing matched the horror of her dining rituals. She refused silverware, ate with clawed gloves. Food was served half-rotten, intentionally. Moldy bread, sour milk, raw liver. When guests hesitated, she stared at them until they bit or bled. "Rot is closer to resurrection than sugar," she once said, licking wine from a cracked goblet. When her husband, Duke Anton, tried to intervene, she banished him from the bedchamber. He died mysteriously 3 months later, found drowned in a river Hedwig had ordered drained. At her peak, her court was a graveyard of whispers. Maids walked barefoot on straw to muffle sound. Letters were burned after reading, mirrors were outlawed, and yet Hedwig's rule was unchallenged. Fear has a way of dressing itself in loyalty. She died during a sermon, not peacefully, but mid-scream. Her skin had begun to split from pressure ulcers. Her priest, trembling, refused to touch her body. It was carried away in silence and burned in secret. All that remains is a ring, crusted in blood, rumored to still carry the scent of her hand. No museum dares display it, and yet her story lives, hidden, whispered, and now revealed. Ready for more? Next, a British queen whose death was so revolting, the royal undertakers refused to enter her chamber for 4 days. What they found when they finally opened the door made one of them go mad. But before we get there, I want your input. Tell me this. What would you do if your partner refused to bathe for 10 years and insisted it was a sacred act of rebellion? Would you stay? Leave? Call a priest? Write it below. I read everything. The smell leaked before the news did. 4 days, that's how long the chambermaids waited outside the door, pressing cloth to their mouths, whispering prayers in Latin. Inside lay Queen Mary of England, not yet a corpse, not yet declared dead, but something far worse, a monarch rotting alive behind royal curtains. Let's rewind. Mary was not supposed to be the dirty one. Born into elegance, educated with polish, she was known for her intellect and restraint. Her early portraits showed a young woman of poise, fragrant, powdered, always in pearl white. But somewhere between her rise to the throne and her final years, something shattered. A phobia. At first it was a simple avoidance of public baths, then private ones. Then her physicians noticed an increasing rash on her inner arms. They recommended cleansing. She refused. Then came the scarves. Long ones, thick, worn in summer, wrapped up to her jawline. Her ladies-in-waiting were instructed never to comment. One did, a French noblewoman, gently suggesting a change in wardrobe for the gala. Mary ordered her shipped home, in silence. No explanation. Soon her gowns were always long-sleeved, sealed at the wrists. Her gloves, never removed, her shoes, custom lined with waxed leather to prevent moisture contamination. She slept in a chamber closed from all ventilation. The fireplace kept burning even in June. The rash spread, became lesions. The physicians were forbidden to examine her. "Only God will touch me now," she said. Her husband, William of Orange, wrote in a private letter, "Her scent is no longer of this world. It creeps beneath doors. It bends candles. I weep not for her body, but for the silence it demands." Despite everything, Mary continued to rule. She signed acts, hosted court, spoke at church. Always distant, always wrapped in fabric that concealed more than modesty. When approached by subjects too closely, she would recoil, covering her face and muttering prayers. And then came the flies. The summer of 1694 was brutal. London baked in stagnant air, and in the royal apartments, something moved. Tiny black specks that swarmed the bedposts, circled her bed canopy, settled into the folds of her drapes. One maid fainted, another ran. By then, Mary no longer stood. She was confined to a chair lined with oilcloth and sage. Her hair had fused into a single tangled mat. Her skin peeled at the elbows. Her lips bled when she spoke. Still, she denied help. When the royal physician finally forced his way in, after a full collapse left her unresponsive, he found the sheets soaked, the walls stained, and the body of the queen barely breathing through the stench. She died that night, but no one would move her, not for 4 days. The undertaker sent from Westminster refused. The royal guard stepped back. Her own confessor, a man who had served her for over a decade, fell to his knees and begged to be excused. Eventually, a team of convicts was brought in under threat of lashings. What they found inside made one of them claw at his eyes. Another tore his tongue out days later. The coroner's report, now locked in royal archives, simply states, "The state of the body defies description. We pray God received her soul before the decay began." Her coffin was filled with crushed herbs, layers of lime and sea salt. It was nailed shut and buried with no open viewing, but the story spread. Servants claimed the room where she died was bricked shut. Others say it still exists, hidden behind a false panel in Kensington Palace, sealed with pitch and iron, and that at night the smell returns. Some say it never left. So what now? Next we reach the end, the dirtiest queen of all, not the smelliest, not the sickest, but the deadliest. Her filth didn't just choke a palace, it brought a kingdom to its knees. Disease, rebellion, mass death, all beginning with a woman who refused to wash. But first you tell me, you're walking into a room with Queen Mary's corpse, 4 days unburied. You have to stay 5 minutes for $1 million. Do you do it, yes or no? And tell me why. She came from the mountains, married into empire, and ruled with a gaze as still as ice. Her name was Queen Tamar of Bactria, a land lost to time, swallowed by deserts and rewritten by empires. But her legend? It endured. Not because she was beloved, not because she was powerful, but because of what followed her into every room: sickness, death, and the smell of rot. Tamar was no accident. She was chosen. Her skin was pale from birth, her voice low and slow, her movements deliberate. The priests of her homeland called her untouched by fire, meaning she refused heat, refused cleansing, refused change. When she married the emperor of a dying dynasty, she brought with her only two things: a locked chest and a decree. No water shall touch my body until the stars fall. At first it was dismissed as a foreign custom, an eccentricity. The emperor allowed it, the court whispered. But years passed, then decades, and still she had not bathed, not once. But unlike other queens, Tamar didn't rot alone. She imposed her ritual on others. Servants were required to wear the same clothes until they frayed from the seams. Courtiers were forbidden to wash their hands. Physicians who smelled of soap were cast out. She abolished public fountains, stripped aqueducts, burned bathhouses. Tamar called it the withdrawing. To remove impurities was, to her, to remove power. The empire needed to stink so the gods would listen. And something began to happen. The sick multiplied. Sores spread among the nobility. Skin darkened. Boils wept. The stench of the court became legendary. Foreign emissaries wore soaked rags over their faces. Monks collapsed during ceremonies. Still, Tamar smiled. She believed the infection was proof of divinity. "We decay because we are chosen," she said. "Our flesh submits so our souls may reign." And then came the fever years. It started with one cough, from a kitchen boy. By spring, the kitchens were closed. By summer, half the palace was dead. Tamar would not allow physicians inside. "Let the unclean pass," she said. "The faithful will remain." She remained. Her chambers were closed for months. The only sounds were the drip of spoiled wine, the scratch of rats, and the dull cough of the queen herself, echoing through tapestries soaked with bodily fluids. One surviving page, found centuries later, describes the final week. She does not walk anymore. She slides. Her feet are wrapped in wax. Her breath is thick, and her eyes do not blink. She smiles even when no one speaks. We leave food, but it rots before it is touched. No one can enter. No one can clean. Her skin has turned black. Her teeth are green. Still, she prays. When the emperor himself fell ill and begged for help, she denied him. He died whispering for water. By the end, Tamar ruled a palace of corpses. The throne room was empty, her court dissolved, her kingdom choking under pestilence. Farmers refused to bring food. The rivers changed color. One day, smoke was seen rising from the royal tower. No one knows if it was fire or something else. When soldiers finally breached the gates, 2 years after her last public sighting, they found nothing. The tapestries were eaten by mold. The floors were soft with decay. And at the center of the tower, a throne, empty, its cushion soaked with something dark. The chest she brought from Bactria, still sealed. No one has ever opened it. Every hand that tried withered within a year. Today, no one says her name aloud in that region. She is known only as the Queen of Rot. Fields where her palace once stood remain barren. And on windless nights, travelers swear they smell burning cloth and spoiled blood. So there you have it. Not just unwashed queens, but women who made filth a weapon, a religion, a law. Women who ruled with rot. But now I want your answer. Final one. Which of them would you spend one night with for a fortune beyond imagination? Mary the Rotten, Tamar the Black Queen, Isabella the Ashen, or Barbara the White Plague? Write it in the comments. No fence sitting, just one. And don't worry, the smell can't reach you. Yet.